policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Of course, we looked last night at what took place. Donald Trump winning 3 states, and certainly Ted Cruz winning one of those. 149 delegates at stake in the Republican primary. I'm going to focus most of my time and attention on that. But let me, for just a minute, for our listeners that are watching the Democratic race, mention 2 things. Number one, Bernie Sanders won Michigan. That surprised a lot of people, and it's caused some in the Democratic Party to say, well, what about this so-called universal appeal that Hillary Clinton would have? What about this short march to a coronation that hasn't really played out? And it certainly is something to behold, and we saw that on evidence last night. Let's also talk about the fact that it won't make a whole lot of difference. This comes from a piece that came out recently called The Undemocratic Democratic Primary. The writer said, I admit it, I might have been wrong when I predicted last month that the Democratic primary was going to be a long slog. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders promises he'll be in the Democratic primary to stay, but that pledge may fall short because of simple arithmetic and because of what the writer calls an arcane Democratic Party process known as superdelegates. He says a casual observer of politics may wonder, how is this possible? After all, heading into yesterday's contest, and of course it was written a day or 2 ago, so you've got to put that in context, Senator Sanders had won nearly half of the primaries and caucuses held to date. Of the 20 caucuses held so far, Sanders has won 8, while former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has won 12. So he should be doing pretty well, right? No. Senator Sanders trails by more than a 2-to-1 margin in the delegate count. Of the 2,383 delegates needed to clinch the nomination, Secretary Clinton has amassed 1,130 delegates. She, of course, picked up a whole lot more last night, and Sanders stands at 499. And so the question is, what's going on here? And it has to do that the Democratic National Committee does not allocate delegates by simply heeding the will of the voters. Instead, they calculate their tallies from a combination of pledged delegates, which are earned from the actual votes of real people, and unpledged delegates known as superdelegates. Superdelegates, as he points out, consist of Democratic office holders as well as 12 distinguished members, a group made up of former presidents, vice presidents, DNC chairs, and the rest. In non-political speak, distinguished members are really Democratic political insiders and D.C. power brokers, not the everyday voters Democrats claim to represent. He goes on and gives you a lot more of the evidence. I won't spend much time on it unless some of you want to talk about that, and when we open up the phones, we can get back to that issue if you'd like. But it is interesting that you have people that call themselves Democrats, are very favorable to the Democratic Party, who find themselves complaining about the Democratic Party establishment and power brokers. So if those of you in the Republican side feel like this is familiar territory, just be grateful that at least you don't have these super delegates out there, because although there are a few, a very small few compared to the Democrats, they also are required to vote according to the way their state voted. So that is not going to upset that. And this is why, as some people have said, I love Elena Johnson and Alexis Levinson wrote, a no good, very bad night for the Stop Trump forces. It was a terrible night, they say, for the forces that have come collectively to be known as the hashtag Never Trump, the diverse array of people, campaigns, and historically important institutions united only by a desire to deny Donald Trump the Republican presidential nomination. Going into Tuesday's primaries, the last elections before the race enters its final determinative stage, when Ohio and Florida award 165 delegates, which, by the way, There's really 65 if you add in those other states that don't get mentioned, which are also winner take all, but we'll leave it at that. And in particular, they hope that Ted Cruz, whose campaign is based in large part on his appeal to evangelical voters, could throw up roadblocks in Mississippi. That did not happen. And that John Kasich could arrest Trump's momentum in Michigan. That did not happen. And both Cruz and Kasich failed, as we might know. And as they did, the slow death of the Republican Party ground onward. Hope of preserving the conservative movement that has sustained it for nearly 4 decades diminished further. In the Magnolia State, Trump came dangerously close to the 50% of the vote, routing Cruz, who had the endorsement of the state's governor, 48% to 36%. An easy victory put to bed the idea that he is starting to struggle with the South's conservative voters, or that Cruz is gaining enough momentum to overtake him. Exit polls suggest that Trump continues to best Cruz among all but the most conservative voters and continues to beat him among the evangelicals who are supposed to be the heart of his electoral coalition. Trump handily won the 84% of the Mississippi primary voters who identified themselves as born-again or evangelical Christians. He took 49% of that group to Cruz's 37%. And so, again, if you are looking for an opportunity for Christian voters to have maybe changed the direction of the Trump juggernaut, it has not happened. Another one put out, interesting enough, by the New York Post, their headline, Trump silences the GOP establishment with primary romps. And so I think unless something remarkable changes after this particular set of elections, and certainly next Tuesday, I think it's pretty obvious that Donald Trump will be the nominee. Not a real surprise, given some of the things that we said months ago, but here we are now, at least with a final total. And let's take a moment to look at those totals. Donald Trump won Hawaii, not a big amount, but he has ended up with 10 delegates to Ted Cruz's 6. And then he won Michigan, and he ended up with 25 delegates to Ted Cruz's 17. And as we just shared, he won in Mississippi with 24 delegates to Ted Cruz's 13. The one place where Ted Cruz did better, and that is in Idaho. He won Idaho and thus got 20 delegates compared to Donald Trump's 12. For those of you keeping track of this, Donald Trump now has 458 Republican delegates pledged to him. That means that they are pledged to vote for him on the first ballot. If he does not get that requisite 1,237 delegate vote, then he could maybe lose some of those, but he already has in his pocket 485. By contrast, you have Ted Cruz, who has 359, so 99 less. And so you can see that that is the position that you find them in right now. Also worth mentioning that in those particular races, you would have expected something else to have happened, and the only other person that really benefited last night was John Kasich, who ended up with 17. So you have 25 for Donald Trump, 17 for Ted Cruz, and 17 for John Kasich, giving him a grand total of 54. Marco Rubio did not bring in any last night, and so he still stands at 151. And so unless something remarkable takes place in one of these Super Tuesday winner-take-all states, which will be next Tuesday, I don't see any way that Donald Trump doesn't eventually gather all of the delegates necessary for him to be nominated and actually elected on the first ballot when the Republican convention goes to Cleveland. For those of you that are keeping track of those states that are coming up next Tuesday are Florida with 99 delegates, Illinois with 69 delegates, Missouri with 52 delegates, North Carolina with 72 delegates, and Ohio with 66 delegates. And those are all important races, even though most people have focused most of their time and attention merely on Florida and Ohio. Let's take a break, but if you'd like to join our conversation, perhaps you voted yesterday in one of those places, or you're going to be voting next Tuesday, love to hear what your thoughts are. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some calls and continue our discussion right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Columnist Cal Thomas says he was going to write a column about how the Republican presidential campaign had become gutter politics, but given the comments from Donald Trump and others, he felt that the gutter would be a step up. The political campaign has descended into the sewer. It is possible that the name-calling and character assassination will diminish as Donald Trump gains more delegates and is no longer facing a challenge from the few remaining candidates. But that doesn't change the damage that has been done by his comments and the responses from Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. First, Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party will use all of his comments during the campaign and from past decades. After all, he has attacked women like Rosie O'Donnell and Carly Fiorina, news anchors like Megyn Kelly, talk show hosts like Hugh Hewitt, news operations like CNN and Fox News, and the President of Mexico. That's just for starters. He is perhaps the most target-rich candidate in the history of American politics. Second, his attacks obscure his positions on key issues facing the nation. Sure, he says he wants to make America great again, but how does he plan to do that? Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich put it this way: "We don't know what kind of president Donald Trump will be because he doesn't know what kind of president he will be." Third, Donald Trump is losing lots of potential votes in the fall because of his behavior. Senator Ben Sasse and talk show host Eric Erickson already are saying they will not vote for Donald Trump if he is the nominee. John Stemberger writes that there are 3 questions evangelicals should ask about Donald Trump. Michael Brown explains why evangelical Christians should not support Donald Trump. And Pastor Max Lucado wonders why decency isn't doing better than the presidential race. This is what happens when a presidential campaign descends into the sewer. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Focus Features and Motive Entertainment present The Young Messiah, a story of Jesus as a youth, in theaters March 11th, rated PG-13. YoungMessiahResources.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Looking back over last night, looking ahead to a Democratic debate as well as a Republican debate. It's going to be a little less significant now because of the collection of delegates in the column for Donald Trump, 458. Ted Cruz, 359. Marco Rubio, 151. John Kasich, 54. And if you would like to join us, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. If indeed Donald Trump is the nominee, are you okay with that? Are you planning on voting for him in the fall? One of the questions that people are raising is it possible that Donald Trump would maybe bury the hatchet and bury some of the anonymity? I went to the dentist yesterday, and it shows, and chipped a tooth last night. So some of the difficulty that they've had with one another, and spend some time maybe trying to build a coalition with Ted Cruz. And that is a possibility, a Trump-Cruz. And the argument being made is that this would attract evangelical voters. But if you look at the numbers I gave you just a minute ago, evangelical voters so far in a place like Mississippi, the most religious state in America is Mississippi. And if Mississippi, with lots of religious voters, voted for Donald Trump, maybe he doesn't necessarily need to have somebody like a Ted Cruz or even a Marco Rubio as his vice president. But we'll see how that goes. I mentioned just a minute ago, the New York Post talked about the fact that Donald Trump scored decisive victories in Michigan and Mississippi, as well as, of course, I mentioned Hawaii as well. And I think it was interesting because, after all, exit polls show that 9 out of 10 voters in the states that I just mentioned, and we'll look at the 2 with the M, Michigan and Mississippi, were either dissatisfied or angry with Washington which, of course, Donald Trump has emphasized. And then, of course, Ted Cruz won in Idaho, but some of those same individuals as well voted for him, who also are frustrated with Washington. So you have the two kind of insurgent candidates right now that find themselves actually dealing with the success that comes by simply running against Washington, D.C. Last night at his press conference, Donald Trump even took a shot at some of that. He said, "I want to thank the special interest and the lobbyists because they obviously did something to drive these numbers," adding that indeed it might have been those millions of ads against him that actually helped him. Those attack ads now are surfacing in Florida. I'd love to hear from some of you in Florida to see if those are having any impact down there. And he's also now calling for everyone to unify the party behind him, and even said that he would be glad to welcome Paul Ryan, who's the House Speaker who's spoken out against him, as well as Mitt Romney, the former presidential candidate who has spoken out against him as part of trying to unify the party. And that is going to be a bit of a challenge, because if you look at this, the latest poll that came out from ABC News Washington Post said that when you look just at Republican voters, just 52% of Republican-leaning independents view Trump favorably, and a bare majority, 51%, said that they would be satisfied with Trump as their party's nominee. So when you look at those who tend to be a little more independent, yes, he's won the Republicans that are showing up at the primaries, but when you get the Republican-leaning independents, the favorability rate drops pretty significantly as well. 55% of Republican-leaning independents prefer an outsider rather than someone with political experience, so that works well for him. And 53% oppose the idea of a brokered convention attempting to block Trump's nomination. So you can see that even if there was a last-minute surge by a Ted Cruz or some kind of coalition, there would be a lot of people that would actually say they would not want to go and vote, and would certainly be upset by some of those actions. So there are some very important issues on the table today, and they're made even more significant simply because of what has been happening in these last couple of primaries. And of course, the primaries last night in Michigan, Mississippi, Hawaii, and Idaho have put Donald Trump now at 458 delegates. Of course, you need 1,237. But it certainly bodes well for him in the future. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Have a couple of comments from people like Jason Riley and a few others, but I wanted to hear from you as well. So let's head out to Georgia first and talk to Robert. Thank you for calling today.
Thank you for having me on. The thing that concerns me with Donald Trump the most is that, in my opinion, he seems to be more of a caricature of conservative thought and traditional American governmental opinion and the Enlightenment values that went into the founding of this nation, more so than he is an actual conservative. I have absolutely no clue what he intends to do when he gets to office, mostly because he seems to be writing the trends and what's going to generate the most attention, what brings the spotlight to his campaign more so than anything. And on what few things we can get a solid answer from him, he seems to be diametrically opposed to conservative economics. He seems to be more of a protectionist than he is a free market economics.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get free trade from him. That's for sure. Yeah. And I think your point's well taken, is that in some respects, he's not going to be your typical conservative. Now, next week, I'm going to have Robert Jeffers in here, and of course, he has supported, not endorsed him, but certainly been supportive of Donald Trump. And his argument is that it might be much more difficult in the nation that we're in right now to elect a true conservative, that we could not even elect a Ronald Reagan or somebody like that now, given the complexion of America. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but at least that's his argument. It's the argument of people that have supported Donald Trump, saying maybe we need a different kind of candidate. Certainly having somebody like a Bob Dole or a John McCain or a Mitt Romney hasn't worked real well, so maybe there is time for someone else. And he is very different. He is not your typical campaigner. He's not your typical politician. He's certainly not your typical candidate. And I think you've made a good point about that. So, Robert, thanks for... Go ahead.
One final thing, and I'll let you go to the next call, but what really kills me comparing him to the other top contenders in the left, Clinton, of course, and then Sanders following right behind it. It seems that everyone is peddling their own brand of National Socialism.
Yes. There have been some that have actually said that what happened in Michigan is due to things like NAFTA and a variety of other issues, because on the one hand, you had Democrats voting in, at least in Michigan, Bernie Sanders, and then Republicans voting in Donald Trump. And both of them are really, in a sense, voting because they are recognizing how some of these trade deals and how some of these alliances have really hurt states like Michigan. So that's at least another possibility. I want to put that on the table. So, Robert, thank you for starting us off. Let's head up to South Carolina now, and we'll talk to Rick. What would you like to add to the conversation?
Hey, Rick, thank you. Kerby, thank you for having me on. I'm a church pastor, and I've been watching the debates go on for the last few months now. I want to say, first of all, that I do not believe that Donald Trump gives expression to what a true evangelical Christian ought to be as far as his character. And that concerns me concerning the condition of the evangelical Christian community, who seems to show no distinction between what is godly and what is ungodly in the sense of godly character. The other thing is that I cannot help but go back to November 2014 when Congress invited an Islamic imam from New Jersey to pray the blessing over them in the name of Allah, thereby breaking the first commandment. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it, but I immediately said, God will not let this slide. Now, I'm not saying that God told me that, his hand is involved in the situation as it is with Donald Trump. But what I'm saying is that I think the possibility exists. I haven't heard anyone else speak on this issue, but the first commandment was broken, and then following in 2015, the other things that took place. And so I'm just saying I think there's a possibility to that.
Rick, I appreciate your phone call, and maybe we'll come back to that issue. It's certainly one to discuss, and I'll kind of stay on the issue of the election, but we'll come back to that as well because it certainly is relevant, perhaps even relevant to our conversation in the second hour, because in the second hour we are going to have the producer of The Young Messiah, but then after that we're going to have Rick Curry and Lewis Hogan. Lewis has been on with us before talking about this issue of praying for America, and in particular United Cry, and so we're going to be getting an update on that event, which is something that we are certainly encouraging all of you that are pastors or leaders to attend. They want to have 30,000 different pastors to pray for America. And while I mentioned praying for America, don't forget we have our Pray, Organize, and Vote material, but I would encourage all of you to click on it now because we have one more item that we have for you, and it's called Take the Pledge. We ask you to pledge to pray for our nation and encourage others to get involved in the election and finally to vote. We recognize that some people have said, well, I may not be able to vote for either of the candidates in the fall. I still think you should vote. You may not need to vote or may not be able to vote for the president, but you can vote for some other individuals. So we want you to take the pledge that you will indeed pray for America and that you will vote come November. We'll be back right after this.
Columbia Pictures presents, in association with Affirm Films, Miracles from Heaven. When 10-year-old Anna Bean develops a rare incurable disease, her mother devotes herself to finding a solution.
Miracles are everywhere.
Then, after Anna has a freak accident, a miracle unfolds. How do we explain the impossible? Miracles from Heaven, starring Jennifer Garner. In theaters Wednesday, March 16th. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at miraclesfromheaven-movie.com.
How critical is the 2016 election? Well, the next president will very likely appoint at least 2, even 3 Supreme Court justices. Our on-budget debt is approaching $20 trillion, and the threats of war and terrorism all too real. Given these things, we're asking you to pray for our nation and to educate and encourage others to get involved. Sign up today at pointofview.net. We'll send reminders to help you pray, organize, and vote. Pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, Vote. The future of America is at stake. We need to pray. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station.
And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Second hour today, we're going to have Cyrus is with us, and he is the director and screenwriter of The Young Messiah. So we'll be talking about that movie for a little bit. Then we'll be talking about DC Talk and this opportunity for DC Cry and the speaking out and praying for this nation. But as we are finishing up this first hour, let's talk about what happened in Michigan, Mississippi, Idaho, and Hawaii. And just before we get to the rest of those phone calls, let me just mention that's a very good piece today in the Wall Street Journal by Jason Riley. He's been on the program with us before, and I oftentimes don't mention the ethnic background of an individual, but I think it is relevant to let you know that if you aren't familiar, Jason Riley is African American, and he used this to talk about some of the Democratic fictions about the Republican Party and Donald Trump. Because he says for years, the New York Times, according to the New York Times, Republican leaders have embraced and exploited the darkest elements of the party's base. In other words, they're kind of racist and they're xenophobic and all the rest. He goes in and points out that, in 2009, Michael Steele became the first black chairman of the RNC. He says this is rather odd behavior for a party playing to the darkest elements of its base. So is the fact that the Republican presidential nominee John McCain in 2008 and Mitt Romney in 2012 hardly the first choices of immigration hardliners. Mr. McCain denounced birthers. Mr. Romney refused to make an issue of Mr. Obama's controversial pastor Jeremiah Wright. And after Mr. Romney's defeat in 2012, the RNC, that would be the Republican National Committee, actually put together an assessment of its missteps and talked about reaching out to various demographic communities: Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islanders, African Americans, Indian Americans, Native Americans, women, and youth. And went on to talk about the fact that, if anything, it's been really trying to be very inclusive, as you could tell by looking at the stage of individuals that were on the Republican presidential stage. And it then goes on to talk about how he really believes it's the Democratic Party that stands to gain the most politically from racial and ethnic division. So we're going to be hearing this now that it becomes more likely that Donald Trump will be the nominee. He won it because he appeals to the darkest parts of the electorate. And whether you agree with that or not, I think Jason Riley is answering a comment that I'm sure is going to surface in the next couple of days or weeks, and so you might want to read that as well. Let's go back to the phones. We'll go to Missouri. Robert, I know you've had a chance to vote, but what would you like to suggest in terms of some things we need to think about?
Well, I want to ask the question of anyone listening. Why, if America was founded on freedom, religious freedom, and the rule of law, whatever, and the Constitution, why is Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton even being considered? Because they are socialists, and that is not what this country is founded on. And it's at this point, it is not a socialist country. And I thank the Lord for that.
Well, I think you have a very good question. Our next issue of Outlook, which is going out to those of you that are donors, is on socialism. And I think there's two issues. Issue number one, those that are supporting Bernie Sanders think socialism is a good idea. They did not grow up, especially the younger ones, even seeing communism and socialism. And even my commentary next week that's coming out talks about the various socialist sympathizers in the Bernie Sanders campaign that have been having a Facebook kind of war with Garry Kasparov. If you're not sure who he is, he was a world chess champion, but also a Soviet citizen, and he will have none of it, and points out that, socialism may sound good as an ideal, but I've lived in the reality of it, and it is not a way to generate capital. It's not a way to build up the human spirit. It crushes it, basically. And yet, if you're young, you have never seen a communist country, or you've maybe been poorly educated in the public schools. In the case of Hillary Clinton, she's picking up a lot of the sort of traditional Democratic voters, and I think there are a lot of them out there that say they would vote for anybody as long as they had a D next to their name. And the fact that she is most likely going to be indicted and perhaps is another flawed candidate out there, illustrates again how sometimes the party labels mean more than some of those ideals. So, Robert, you raised a good question. And as you might imagine, since we are doing this issue on socialism, we're going to do some programs on it. And when we do those, I hope you'll call back and we'll kind of explore that in a little more detail. But one of the places where there is going to be a vote next Tuesday in Florida, 99 delegates at stake. And so, Sandra, I know you're going to have a chance to vote next week. Who do you plan to vote for?
Donald Trump.
Well, tell me a little bit more. Are you a Trump supporter from the beginning, or what's your kind of political background, things like that?
Well, I grew up in the church, and my grandfather was a Baptist preacher, and most of my family are staunch Republicans. But when Jimmy Carter ran, I thought he was the most Christian president we've ever had. And I don't buy into the idea that if you're a Republican, you're necessarily a real Christian. I've seen a lot of phony ones, in my opinion, and I don't believe George Bush was a Christian at all. His actions didn't. They don't remind me of someone that was Christian at heart. So I think a lot of voters are tired of the insinuation that if you're a Republican, you're a Christian, and then getting the yes men Republicans pushed down our throats as being the best candidates when they're picked by the lobbyists and the companies and people that run our country to keep things exactly as they are.
So that seems to be why you supported Donald Trump, because you don't feel like he's necessarily in the pocket of the lobbyists. Is that a fair statement?
Right. I think he's legitimate. I think he's real. I think he's strong enough to run the country. I think he'd pick strong people, not people that he could, not people that would be just grateful to have that job and would be pushed around. And I wasn't a Trump supporter at first, but he won me over with his honesty and, you know, picking on him by Marco Rubio, saying that he had hired illegal immigrants, when that things like that really turned me off, because if you hire that many people and you have that many companies and you have that many managers, and that there are going to be some illegal immigrants hired through either fraudulent documentation or whatever, and it just seemed like the Marco Rubio was being pushed to be the candidate by the Republicans, and I think that's why everybody is scared of him, because nobody believes that he's intelligent enough, strong enough, or old enough. He still acts like a schoolboy, and so it's kind of offensive. I feel like what the Republican Party tells us, if you're not smart enough to make a decision, so we're going to tell you who you need to vote for and why this candidate isn't a Christian and why this one is better. And it's very offensive to me personally that they tout one candidate and just try to destroy the others. I've never seen such a display in my life by Marco Rubio. He was very abusive, he interrupted. He took more than his time all the time. He didn't answer the questions. He didn't stay on task. And all he tried to do was say, we're going to beat Hillary Clinton and we're going to do this, and just say what he was obviously told and programmed to say, reminding me exactly of George Bush all of the time when he was in office. I don't think that man ever knew what was going on, not one day in his life.
Well, again, let me give some others a chance to join the conversation, because I think I got your point, and it's a good one, because I think it helps us understand why, in this case, somebody who's probably voted more for Democrats would vote for Donald Trump. And so let me pick off one more call before we take a break here. In Texas, KABX. Linda, what about this voting for Donald Trump? Well, guess we there we go. Well,
I was interested in... Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Go for it.
Okay. I was interested in the lady that just talked, because that's my question. I want to know, and I would like for people to answer this, why people who say they're evangelicals will vote for Donald Trump. You know, one of the things he said is he didn't believe he'd ever done anything that required forgiveness. His attitude toward people has been anything but anything following Jesus. And does it matter whether we have a Christian as president? If it doesn't matter, and we're using a different, what is a Christian? And to me, a Christian is someone who has recognized that they were sinners, that Jesus paid for that. They're grateful. They've decided they've following him. And is this important to us as a church anymore? What qualities does Donald Trump have? Being honest, saying what he thinks is not necessarily a Christian attribute.
Sure. Okay, we'll take a break and we'll see if some people want to answer that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Second hour, let me mention again, we're going to spend a little bit of time, first of all, talking about this new movie, The Young Messiah, and then we'll talk about United Cry, the gathering of 30,000 pastors and Christian leaders in Washington, D.C. on April 9th. So lots to talk about, but we'll take some more phone calls first. Bob in Georgia, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, the biggest problem we got right now is corruption. And Donald Trump I haven't seen anybody in many, many years garner the support that he's drawn already. But one thing I want to bring out is that pastor that was on there a while ago that said that we're talking about the imam in 2014.
Yes.
Blessing Congress or whatever. And he said he don't know if God has a hand in it or not. Well, I've been thinking that for a long time because if you remember what happened on the road to Damascus, Saul of Tarsus, look what he turned out to be. And if Ted Cruz was to run as his running mate, Donald Trump's already said that he'll depend heavily on his advisors. Well, that would be the most perfect ticket we can come up with, because maybe Ted can even help Donald with his religious, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
his religious training.
Yep. It's so funny because people talked about Trump and Carson, and they're two different people, but Trump and Ted Cruz are pretty different people too. So it would be an interesting ticket if that happened.
Both garner a lot of votes, but Ben Carson would be a good Secretary of State.
Well, we'll see. I think Ben Carson is going to be our Secretary of Health and Human Services if a Republican wins, but that's a big if in light of some of the things we've been talking about. Bob, I appreciate your phone call. Let me see if I can just get a few more calls in here because so many of you would like to express your opinion. We'll head down to Louisiana, and that is, again, a vote that took place just recently. And Ricky, what would you like to share with our audience today?
Yes, I've been noticing that every time that Trump gets up and says that, Ted holds up the Bible and he puts it down and says, and Ted lies. Well, nobody on anything, media, Christian station or anything, has proven one thing that Ted has lied about. But yet, every time Donald gets up and says, Ted lies, but nobody has been able to say one thing or prove one lie that Ted has did. But anyhow, going back to Donald Trump being in the lead, I think, what's going to happen, the establishment's going to offer Rubio, hey, we'll give you $10 million, $50 million, whatever it takes to help you run for governor, or if you want to keep your Senate seat, we'll help you get reelected. Just drop out the race so Ted can win, because if you take the delegates of Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, Ted would have 550 delegates as opposed to Donald Trump's 464 or whatever. So I believe all the Christians should have backed Ted up front. Jeffries and Falwell, they should have had a little discernment, and all the Christians should have got. And then if Ted didn't get it, well, then let your second choice be Donald Trump. And what I've been hearing all along is that every now and then you get some Trump supporters, and when they find out that Trump donates to homosexuals, that he donates to Planned Parenthood, they starting to switch to Ted. But nobody's dropping from Ted to go to Donald, or nobody is dropping from Rubio. In fact, Tony Perkins made a very observant thing. He said that if Rubio drops out, Donald Trump's not going to get those votes. Ted Cruz is, and that's a fact. Ted's going to get Rubio's votes if he drops out the race, that is.
I think he would get most of them. I'm not sure he'd get all of them. But, again, Rubio has 151. Even if he got 100 of the 151, that would put him even with Donald Trump. So, anyway, interesting comment. Let me just give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation. Let's head up to Illinois. We're watching that race up there because next week you get to vote, and 69 delegates at stake. Brittany, what would you like to share with our audience today?
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Yes, would you have something to share with us real quickly?
I do. I'm a new voter. This will be my first time to vote, and I'm just very concerned about this election and the way our country is heading. Just with Donald Trump, they're saying that all these evangelicals are voting for him. I'm referring a lot to the press conference last night. He said that he was the most Christian man on the stage. Well, how can you really consider that? Because, how could a Christian have all these casinos and wineries and have what goes on at his casinos? He says that he doesn't drink, but why would you? If you personally don't think you should drink and tell your kids that, then why are you having all of these casinos where people can drink? And, he insulted a young man on the press conference because he was concerned about his bad language that he uses. And, Donald Trump was just, insulting him because he didn't believe in bad language. And, he said that he was a very principled man. And, his golden rule is if someone does something bad to you, do something worse to them. I don't get how that's very principled. I don't understand how the evangelicals can vote for him.
Well, again, we're going to give some an opportunity to explain why they did or why they are going to. But again, you have a chance to vote next Tuesday. And let me just mention, just before we take another phone call, that on our Pray, Organize, and Vote, we're encouraging all of you, even if you've been there before, to go back, because we're encouraging you to take the pledge. And this is an argument that we're making that we're concerned about. First of all, we want to make sure that all of you would pledge to pray for this nation. Then number two, that you would also pledge to educate yourself and encourage others to get involved in the election, and finally to vote. I'm hearing a lot of people say, well, if it's these two candidates, I'm not voting. Well, even if you couldn't vote for either one of those presidential candidates, and I think you should cast a vote for your presidential candidate, there are other very important elections, and so I would encourage you to take the pledge. And so that's on our website, pointofview.net. Click on the banner that says Pray, Organize, and Vote. Just before we run out of time this hour, let's go to South Carolina this time. Franklin, I'll give you the last word. What would you like to share?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Well, in our primary, I supported Cruz, but, when I look at, if it comes down to Democratic nominee versus Hillary Clinton versus Trump, it reminds me of a story I hear one time when one rich brother paid another minister to call his other rich brother that had died a saint. Whenever I look at what we would have given to us by the Democratic Party in that one versus Trump, I would look at him as being a saint versus what we would have what we'll be looking at in the Democratic Party. I just wanted to make that comment.
It's a good comment, and if nothing else, as we shared yesterday, and I will do more of that later, but we certainly are running out of time in this hour, you might want to watch my commentaries for next week. I've mentioned a few of them. Of course, the one today, which relates very much to what Brittany was saying just a minute ago, I called it sewer politics. Now, I borrowed that phrase from Cal Thomas, who wrote a column about that, because he was going to call it gutter politics, and he said, no, that's too good. It's really down in the sewer. And so some of the comments being made in the campaign are of concern. But also next week, my commentaries coming out deal with this issue of the indictment and what would happen if indeed, and it looks very likely now, that James Comey, the FBI director, recommends indictment. Well, do it now so that Democratic voters know that you're going to have a candidate that has been recommended for indictment. And then I go through, what if Loretta Lynch decides to actually compile a grand jury to indict her, or decides not to do so, and what are the implications of all of that? So there are some very important things that need to be addressed on the Democratic Party side, but since the real action and excitement right now is on the Republican side, that's where we're focusing our attention. Although at the beginning of the program did talk a little bit about Bernie Sanders winning in Michigan, which I think has as much to do with things like NAFTA, maybe the World Trade Organization and things like that, where people in Michigan have been concerned about some of these trade deals and these associations. And certainly Donald Trump won there as well. And then, of course, the issue of the superdelegates. So there are some things to talk about with the Democrats, and we will do so. Of course, the debate tonight will give us a chance to mention some of those tomorrow. And then, of course, you have a Republican debate, which we'll talk about on Friday. And we just have a lot to cover, and we'll try to do as best as we can, covering all of that as much as we can. But please visit our website. Pray, Organize, and Vote is on the website, pointofview.net. And when we come back, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this wonderful new movie, The Young Messiah. We encourage you to go and watch Risen. Young Messiah looks at Jesus on the other side. What was a young Jesus like? And how do we think through some of the things that happened to him? We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time in the first half hour talking about this new film, The Young Messiah. We've been talking about it, but now we have a chance to talk with the individual who was the director and screenwriter, and his name is Cyrus Nowrasteh. And if you're not familiar with his name, you're familiar with his works, because first of all, here is an individual who has spent 25 years as a writer, producer, and director, has received all sorts of awards at places like the Toronto and Los Angeles and Berlin film festivals, and even Movie Guide Awards. We've had Ted Baer on so many different times as well. You may have remembered some of the things he's done, like the cable series The Day Reagan Was Shot, or the ABC miniseries The Path to 9/11. I remember when it came out years ago, he and his wife wrote and directed the stoning of Soraya M. and some of those. And so it is just a great privilege to be able to sit across the table from you.
Well, thanks for having me. Thank you.
We've appreciated your work. You have been involved in some time. And one of the things we've talked about here on Point of View is really the need for us to support faith-based films. And so as I've shared with you off air, but I'll share again with everybody on air, we really want our listeners to go to these films, especially the first week they come out, to send a signal to Hollywood that we want more of those, to encourage people like you to do more of this. And so in some respects, The Young Messiah is a little more of a question mark for some of our people, Cyrus, because they go, well, we don't really know much about Jesus. We know he was born in Bethlehem. We know he went to Egypt. We have a story of him when he's 12 years old. There's a lot of filling in the gaps, and I think this film has done a really fascinating job of helping us think about what it must have been like to be Jesus, to have James next to him, to have Mary and Joseph. Tell us a little bit more about how you came to put this all together.
Well, you know, this is based on a novel by Anne Rice that was published over 10 years ago. It was called Christ the Lord Out of Egypt. She actually is reissuing the book presently under the new title, The Young Messiah. It's rare for an author of her repute to do that. Now, in her original novel and in the movie, The Young Messiah, we're exploring 1 year in the boyhood of Jesus. We're imagining 1 year. It's a sort of a what if or what could have been. We're not saying that this is exactly as it was, because we don't know. However, when you're doing something like this, it's a kind of informed conjecture. You've got to educate yourself and have advisors and consultants around. Dr. Ted Baer is actually one of the people who read early drafts of the script, as well as some other pastors, priests, and friends who are very knowledgeable on these issues, so that we weren't getting ourselves into trouble and treading into dangerous territory. The point here is to do a story that is, you know, reverential and respectful of Jesus and his message. And that is really the intent here. And I think whatever gets people talking about Jesus, I think is a good thing. And whenever you're doing something that people consider, the words I've heard are extra biblical or from the lost books or apocryphal or whatever, it's how you do it. I think that matters the most. And we have tried to do this in as biblically consistent a way as possible. Nothing that young Jesus does in this, or actually everything that young Jesus does in this, is guided by Jesus as he's revealed in the Bible.
Right. And again, like it is, when he's age 7, and so he's in Egypt, then he comes back to Nazareth, he goes to Jerusalem. So you get a sense of the culture that is in. And whether it was in Risen or now in the Young Messiah, this is really helpful because I think some of us, when we read our Bibles, we read into it our 21st century world. And if you've ever traveled to Israel, and we have a trip going again to Israel this May, you realize the world and the context in which it is done. And you've done a very good job of helping us understand the tension between the Zealots and the Romans, what happens in Egypt, Herod. I mean, there's just a lot there. And again, it's conjecture, it's speculation, but it's based upon biblical evidence that we do have and archaeological and historical evidence that we have.
Look, I like to say it's inspired by Scripture and rooted in history.
Yes.
But at the very basis of all of it is a love for Jesus.
Yes.
And that's what I meant when I said earlier, that this would be outright rejected by Christians who saw it. And we just wanted to do it right. So what we did was we did a lot of advanced screenings and test screenings.
Right.
And for religious influencers, pastors all across the country. We've received, if you go to the website, theyoungmessiah.com, you'll see the endorsements that we have received. And they're cross-denominational. We've got Focus on the Family. We got Campus Crusade, Young Life, the Salvation Army, numerous Catholic cardinals, bishops, and archbishops who've come out in support of the movie. And a lot of people associated with the film are frankly shocked at the unanimity of support that we've gotten from all these different denominations. I mean, we're also Johnny Hunt of the Southern Baptist Convention came out and endorsed it with incredible enthusiasm. So we are just so gratified and humbled by the support we've gotten from all these different groups.
And by the way, if you go to the website, pointofview.net, we have a link to youngmessiahresources.com, so you can find it there. And as you go down this list, it's kind of a who's who of people that we've had on this program, people with Cru or Campus Crusade, and Kevin Palau with Elise Palau, as well as Hugh Hewitt, who's been on the program with us, Ron Luce. I mean, go down the long, long list. And of course, as you also go to the About section, you'll know a little bit more about that. And there's also a place where your church could maybe have group sales, because in just a minute, I want to talk about getting everybody to show up. But the other question, there's always been two questions this movie's had since the beginning. There's questions I asked before we started promoting it, and then questions people have asked me when I've been promoting it. And number one was, well, how biblical is it? I think you've answered that one. The second one was, okay, is it something I can take my kids to? Because, with Risen, I had to say, okay, there's an opening scene where it's, somewhat violent. There is a place where Jesus, the young Jesus, sees soldiers having to kill some zealots, but this one probably is much more for the whole family, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, PG-13 is a pretty broad ratings zone. You see a lot of disparate kind of movies within that rating. I would call this a soft PG-13.
Yeah, and if you had that one place where he has to fight the guy off, it could be a PG.
Right,
really.
You have some brief moments of violence. They aren't too graphic. I think it's a movie for the whole family. I've actually seen groups of children who've seen the movie, and it's really been a great experience because they respond with such fascination at seeing Jesus, a Jesus who's their age.
Their age, that's
who's
right.
Who's a child, who's laughing, who's playing, asking questions, just like they are today. I mean, I think it's pretty daunting for a child to only know, the only image they know of Jesus is suffering on the cross.
Right.
It's scary.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about what we can do to really support this, and that gets back to group sales and showings and those kinds of things. And if you have a question, certainly we'll give you that opportunity, because Cyrus Nowrasteh is with us and will be with us for just a little bit longer. And so if you have a comment or question, 1-800-351-1212. But if not, sit back as we talk about the young Messiah. We really have, through the many months especially, and over the last couple of years, really tried to promote some of these faith-based films. This one is coming out, so your marching orders are, first of all, to go to the film. Even before that, you can go to the website. We have some trailers and other things you can watch as well. But let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Columnist Cal Thomas says he was going to write a column about how the Republican presidential campaign had become gutter politics, but given the comments from Donald Trump and others, he felt that the gutter would be a step up. The political campaign has descended into the sewer. It is possible that the name-calling and character assassination will diminish as Donald Trump gains more delegates and is no longer facing a challenge from the few remaining candidates. But that doesn't change the damage that has been done by his comments and the responses from Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. First, Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party will use all of his comments during the campaign and from past decades. After all, he has attacked women like Rosie O'Donnell and Carly Fiorina, news anchors like Megyn Kelly, talk show hosts like Hugh Hewitt, news operations like CNN and Fox News, and the President of Mexico. That's just for starters. He is perhaps the most target-rich candidate in the history of American politics. Second, his attacks obscure his positions on key issues facing the nation. Sure, he says he wants to make America great again, but how does he plan to do that? Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich put it this way: "We don't know what kind of president Donald Trump will be because he doesn't know what kind of president he will be." Third, Donald Trump is losing lots of potential votes in the fall because of his behavior. Senator Ben Sasse and talk show host Eric Erickson already are saying they will not vote for Donald Trump if he is the nominee. John Stemberger writes that there are 3 questions evangelicals should ask about Donald Trump. Michael Brown explains why evangelical Christians should not support Donald Trump. And Pastor Max Lucado wonders why decency isn't doing better than the presidential race. This is what happens when a presidential campaign descends into the sewer. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Focus Features and Motive Entertainment present The Young Messiah, a story of Jesus as a youth, in theaters March 11th, rated PG-13. YoungMessiahResources.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Cyrus Nowrasteh with us, and again, we're talking about the Young Messiah for a few more minutes. Second hour, we're going to be talking about DC Cry, so let's, if we can, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to give us a call. But Cyrus, let's talk about this for just a minute. As people go to the website, and we have a link to YoungMessiahResources.com, there's a place there for group sales and tickets and things of that nature. So talk to not only our individuals that you encourage to go to the theater this weekend, but also, is it possible that churches could do this, that they could host a private screening or maybe even develop a theater and bring people there? What are some options there?
There are a number of those that are going on already.
Yes.
And I think in over 200 locations across the country. And they are giving out tickets to church groups who are busing people to the theater. They're calling that premiere night. That's Thursday night.
Okay.
But you can also buy group tickets to go Friday or go over the weekend or go anytime you want. But if you go to YoungMessiahResources.com, they will fill you in with more detail.
And again, there's a place where it says find a theater near you. So as long as you know what your zip code is, you're in pretty good shape. So you can find out where that's unfolding. And talk for just a minute about the importance of that first weekend, because obviously somebody says, well, I can't come this weekend, or maybe I will, or I'll go to next weekend. But that first weekend is really key, isn't it?
Yes, especially, because the bellwether out there is always the first weekend, as people are saying, okay, is there an audience for this movie? They're going to know and make their determination from the first weekend's box office receipts. So you can really send a message that first weekend.
Yes.
By going to see the movie And if you like the movie, telling other people to go see the movie. If you see it on Friday, tell them to go see it on Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah.
And then, we'll be able to see how everything, panned out box office wise. And then you've got the possibility even for expansion to more theaters the following weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And it can get out further and further. It's opening, I think, in about 1,600 or 1,700 screens, which is pretty wide net, but it doesn't hurt to have more.
Yeah. Well, again, word of mouth helps. I mean, you saw that with War Room, and you saw that with God Is Not Dead, and even recently Risen. So it certainly needs to happen with Young Messiah. While I'm talking about resources for just a minute, you have some. There's a discussion guide there. There's some other resources that people can use, some buck slips, some mini posters, that kind of thing. So if people wanted to promote this even in their church or promote it in their Sunday school or small group, there's still an opportunity to do that, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And, they're very good at responding to those inquiries.
And again, we have some videos. One of my responsibilities, I guess this is a homework assignment. We do have an interview that they did with Cyrus that we've posted. Is about 14 minutes long, but we also have those trailers, and there is a share button. So what I would encourage you to do is watch one of the trailers. Some of them are about 2 minutes long. And I would encourage you to watch the trailer, then click on that share button, and then put it on your Facebook page, or maybe if you have a blog, put it on your blog, or send it to someone. Maybe send it to your pastor that's saying, I really don't know much about this Young Messiah thing. What do you think about this? Because that would be helpful in really educating more people, don't you think?
Absolutely.
So again, these are some action items that I'm giving to you, but tell us, just before we run out of time, what else we could do in terms of this, in terms of preparation. Are there certain parts of Scripture that we might want to read? Are there certain kinds of things that we could actually do just to make sure that we're ready to go watch this movie?
I would encourage people to go down the list of endorsements that we have at the site to see what cardinals and bishops and, evangelical leaders across the country are saying about the movie, because they've all seen it and have actually given permission to include those statements that they make about the film under the endorsements for the movie, because I think that's very reassuring to people when faith influencers speak up about something.
Let's talk about a few of those people that have been on the program. Ted Baer's been on the program. He said extremely powerful and emotional, theologically orthodox. That was good. You mentioned a Cardinal Sean O'Malley, captivating, inspiring, and deeply moving. Denny Ryberg's been on with us, president of Young Life, and he said, I just love the Young Messiah. We work with over 2 million kids. I'd love to see the students we work with have an opportunity to see the film. So there's just a couple of ones that I pulled off of the website. You can read a lot more, but Cyrus, you've done a really good job of kind of pulling this together, getting us to begin to think outside the box a little bit, since we don't really have any kind of parameters for Scripture. We do know some things about the life of Jesus, but very little, and the rest is based upon theology and historical perspective. So I think you've really put that together in a way that I find engaging, and I think a lot of people are really going to appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think the whole goal here is to do something that will get people talking about their faith, talking about Jesus, talking about the Holy Family and the message, just from a new angle.
Yes. Well, and there's a discussion guide, so if you find yourself saying, okay, I'd like to gather everybody together in my small group, and after we watch the film together, we'll come and discuss it, we've provided some of those resources as well. So very good. Cyrus, just before I let you go, I know you're heading on to some other activities. What's next for you? Because we followed your career. We may not have known you personally, but we certainly have followed some of the films and miniseries and things that you've done. So where do you go from here?
Well, I love history. I love true stories. I've been developing a project on the Battle of New Orleans.
Wow.
Andrew Jackson.
Certainly, yeah.
I've also been developing a project on Robert Kennedy's 82-day run for the presidency in 1968, which was kind of a search for redemption on his part personally. So I've got some interesting projects out there. And hopefully the Young Messiah does well and makes other things come together easier.
Yes. So again, you'd encourage everybody to see if they can make it to the theater Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we open officially on Friday. There are some advanced screenings on Thursday night, but Friday is our official opening date, March 11th. The Young Messiah nationwide at a theater near you.
Yes. And I would imagine when it's made its run, the DVDs will be available, don't you think?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We're going to have the DVDs probably available in summer.
Yeah.
And we'll have all kinds of extra features on there, including some of these influencers talking about the theology of the movie and the biblical basis for it.
Yes. The incarnation is interesting because you play it out as Jesus was fully God, fully man. But as a child, did he fully understand all of his mission? And so there you can have it either way. Was Jesus walking around a complete know-it-all, or did he have to sort of discover who he was? And so you play that out as he's sort of figuring this out. And then, of course, his mother shares more with him. And then they begin to put all the pieces together. And then he is now ready for ministry. And it's an interesting discussion of the incarnation, which is certainly something we usually only talk about at Christmas time, but I'm glad it's coming out right now before Easter because it'll get people thinking again about who Jesus was and what he came to do.
No, and debate and discussion is good.
Yeah. Well, again, that's what we have been trying to promote. And so let me again mention some of the resources that we have there. If you go to our website, pointofview.net, you click on the picture there of Cyrus Nowrasteh, and you will see that will link you to youngmessiahresources.com, or you can go there directly. We have some resource tools, and let me again point you to some of the guide. They have a premier event guide for those of you who want to do that, a discussion guide. There's some other things for children that are available, flyers, resources. There are the videos. And again, my assignment to you is to watch one of those trailers. It's about 2 minutes long, won't take long. I think it will get you captivated. And then click on that share button. As you do that, then you can put it on your Facebook page and start a conversation. Say, I heard of the director and screenwriter on Point of View, and it looks like a really good film, and I would encourage you to go. Or pass it on to your pastor or someone else who have not had a chance to hear this interview. And then, of course, we have the endorsement section there, which also would be helpful if you're trying to convince individuals that they may want to attend. And finally, we have the tickets and group sales, so that if you would want to get more than just a few of your friends, neighbors, coworkers, or maybe your Sunday school class, go and watch The Young Messiah. So, Cyrus, thanks for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to spend some time first with Pastor Rick Kerby, as well as Lewis Hogan, and they've been involved in promoting what is called United Cry, and this will be taking place April 9th. In Washington, D.C., and they're going to gather together about 30,000 pastors and Christian leaders. Will be before the Lincoln Memorial. And even though I'm doing the program on Friday, I'm going to fly out, and then I'm going to actually host the radio broadcast of that on Saturday. And we certainly wanted to encourage all of you to consider what you might do, either to be at that event or to pray for America, because that is certainly something we've encouraged you to do. While I'm talking about that, don't forget we have the Pray, Organize, and Vote material, the one-stop election resource. And today we're encouraging all of you to click on that and take the pledge that you will pray for our nation, that you will educate yourself, encourage others to go out and to get involved, and finally to go out and vote. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk with Rick Kerby and Lewis Hogan. All that coming up right after this.
Columbia Pictures presents, in association with Affirm Films, Miracles from Heaven. When 10-year-old Anna Bean develops a rare incurable disease, her mother devotes herself to finding a solution.
Miracles are everywhere.
Then, after Anna has a freak accident, a miracle unfolds. How do we explain the impossible? Miracles from Heaven, starring Jennifer Garner, in theaters Wednesday, March 16th. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at miraclesfromheaven-movie.com.
How critical is the 2016 election? Well, the next president will very likely appoint at least 2, even 3 Supreme Court justices. Our on-budget debt is approaching $20 trillion, and the threats of war and terrorism all too real. Given these things, we're asking you to pray for our nation and to educate and encourage others to get involved. Sign up today at pointofview.net. We'll send reminders to help you pray, organize, and vote. Pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, Vote. The future of America is at stake. We need to pray. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we're going to spend some time now talking about United Cry, and if this is the first time you've heard about it, we'll certainly try to educate you, but most of you probably remember that we've talked about it in the past. It is a pastor-led call to reclaiming America's future, and it is going to be a time in which 30,000 pastors, Christian leaders will gather April 9th at the Lincoln Memorial and pray for America. And we have two guests to educate us a little bit more on this issue, and as always, we encourage you to go to the website so that you can find out more about that. It's unitedcry.org. We'll give you that information more in just a minute. First of all, let me welcome back to the microphone Lewis Hogan. He is an individual who has served as a youth pastor and done church planning. He's been an executive pastor. He's been a senior pastor, even been a director of a house of prayer. He also launched a national ministry called Awakening USA 2012, and of course has been the impetus behind United Cry. So, Lewis, how are you doing today?
Good, Kerby. How are you doing? And good to be with you today.
And let me, I'll come back to you in just a minute to have you explain United Cry, but I also want to introduce Rick Curry. He is an individual who helped establish Kingsway Church back in Pensacola, Florida. Currently, he is the national director of the Sentinel Group and the Journey to Transformation in the United States. Matter of fact, has actually served as the chairman of the board for the Sentinel Group, and an individual that also has a real dedication to the importance of prayer. And so, Rick, thank you for joining us today as well on Point of View.
Good to be with you.
Yes. Lewis, explain this to our listeners. We have been talking about United Cry, but I recognize that we have people that tune in and tune out. Some people might remember the interviews we've done with you, but some might be saying, sure, I've never heard of United Cry. What's it all about?
Sure. Well, Kerby, yeah, it's so good to be with you guys today. And, you know, we're 30 days out right now from April the 9th for next month. And I can't believe it, actually. This has been really a 2-year process of putting this together. And the Lord has been so faithful to us, and we have been working on this for 2 years. As the Lord began to speak to my wife and I about putting together a national pastors prayer gathering, a Joel 2 prayer gathering there in Washington, D.C. And as we prayed about it, the Lord was very specific on the date of that, which was April the 9th, 2016. And 2 years ago, when we set that date, didn't realize that April the 9th was really some significant dates from history. To just review those real quick, one of those being the ending of the Civil War on April the 9th, 1865, the birthing of the Azusa Street Revival on April the 9th, 1906, and then the death of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was executed on April the 9th, 1945. So those 3 dates have begun to form the framework for DC 16, where this is a Joel 2 gathering, where the Scripture tells us, you know, when a nation is in crisis, and we are in a crisis in our nation right now, what is the response of the church and believers when a nation really is in crisis? And Joel 2 gives us that, where it says, for the elders and the leaders to gather together and to, with hearts of repentance, return to the Lord with all of our hearts, with hearts of repentance, saying, God, would you have mercy on our nation? Please have mercy on our nation. And ultimately, that's what we're going to be doing in Washington, D.C. It's a prayer gathering. We're not coming together to protest the government or the policies of our government. We feel like it's way beyond that right now. It's this appeal to the Lord, to heaven. Say, God, would you have mercy on our nation? Would you intervene in our nation? So it's a prayer gathering of pastors, Christian leaders, and anyone's invited to come. We're asking pastors and Christian leaders to bring your staff and your intercessors, your prayer leaders, on April the 9th, 1 month from today, at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C.
You mentioned America in Crisis, and we have a video that we have at unitedcry.com, and my assignment for our listeners is to watch the video. It will take you just 2 minutes, and it certainly establishes some of the challenges that our nation is facing, and also really brings us to this call for pastors to participate. And whereas maybe you heard us do interviews in the past with Lewis Hogan and said, well, okay, that's in the future, as he points out, it's 30 days from now. So we
right.
Might encourage you to also click on there and start looking at some of that travel information in terms of whether or not you want to fly there or drive there. I know many of our listeners perhaps are close enough in the East Coast where they could drive to that event. But for those of you on the other parts of the nation, then there is travel information there. There's charter bus information. There's quite a bit. So if you're wondering about some of the specifics, feel free to visit the website. And let me also open up the phones in case some of you have some specific questions, because now we're getting closer to this event, and maybe some of you would like to ask a question or maybe express your opinion about the importance of praying for our nation. So I'll open up the phones again, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Rick Curry, let me come to you. As an individual with the Sentinel Group, that was a ministry founded by George Otis. We all know him around the table here, and certainly have been very much involved in prayer as well. But talk about why you think this is such a significant event.
Well, when I met Lewis, and Lewis is certainly the visionary and the founder for United Cry, but when I met him and heard his call, heard his heart for the nation, really that we might as leaders take up a posture of humility and cry out for the Lord to come and visit his people, come and touch his people and touch our nation. Just the journey that we've been on, everything that's been going on with us, we just knew that this resonated deep in our hearts, that we just had to be a part of this and do everything that we could do to encourage pastors and leaders in our network and beyond that to come to Washington, D.C. on April the 9th for this, what we really believe is going to be a major historic gathering. And, while I'm saying that here, Kerby, let me just say how much we appreciate your interest and willingness to be there on that day personally. But I just knew that immediately it resonated in my heart and my spirit. I didn't want just another political event. It's not political at all, but it's really the body of Christ taking up a posture of humility as we seek the heart of the Lord for a nation that's in crisis.
Rick, you've lived in Kentucky, you've lived in Florida, you've been a pastor. Speak to some of the pastors who might be listening to this right now that say, well, Rick, you just don't know how busy I am, and, to actually taking time away to go to Washington, D.C. I'll just support you in prayer from my pastorate in Kentucky or Florida or Ohio or Illinois or California or even Alaska. Why would you tell pastors that it's important for them to come to this event?
But my wife and I right now have turned our church over to our eldest son, who's leading the ministry here in Pensacola. We're now traveling all over the nation full time, and as we meet pastors and leaders all over the nation, there is an undertoning of desperation that's beginning to surface in the church, that is really signing itself or manifesting, if you will, as a real hunger in the heart of pastors. Just yesterday, we had a call from Wyoming where there was a church leader there that found out about this and said, hey, my pastor just has to be there. And so they're paying his way to come, and we encourage churches to do that. But specifically to pastors, we know as a pastor for nearly 30 years, I know the struggle, the burden, the time restraints, the demands that people and schedule and all that place on us. But certainly as we stand in our pulpits or we sit quietly in our offices or we move about our communities, we begin to realize and we begin to see and hear in the hearts of our people that there is a desperation that is surfacing in America. And it's time again for religious leaders and pastors to gather together, to take a stand on one day, to spend time in national repentance, crying out for national revival. And we just really believe that there is a synergy that is developing all over the nation as Christian leaders, intercessors, pastors, and all begin to cry out and fast for awakening and a great revival to come to America. So I know that pastors are busy, but I would just say, Pastor, we want to encourage you. We want to ask you to pray about gathering with us there at the Lincoln Memorial. that we might see the heart of the nation turn back to God.
Let's take a break. When we come back, let me take a phone call or two. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get one of these calls and also continue talking both with Rick Curry and Lewis Hogan. But during the break, this would be a great time to go to United DC Cry. Again, it's United Cry, and it's also called DC Cry, and it's a great way for you to find out a little bit about what is happening there. 30,000 pastors to gather and pray for America's future will be taking place, as we mentioned, April 9th from about 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Lincoln Memorial. And Rick mentioned my involvement. I'll be doing some of the radio broadcasts, so those of you that will not be able to attend still could be able to listen in to not only the prayers that are offered, but also the interviews we'll try to do with some of those leaders. And it is kind of becoming a who's who of individuals who have endorsed it. And you need to ask your pastor if he is planning on attending, and if he is unaware of it, then I would encourage you to watch that video that we have and then send it to him and say, we need to send you, even if we need to pay for it. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View. Your
Back for a few more minutes talking about United Cry, a pastor-led call reclaiming America's future, and certainly an opportunity for you to participate. Let me just mention as a programming note that tonight is the Democratic presidential debate in Florida, so tomorrow we'll spend a little bit of time in the first hour looking back at some of the comments made then by Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and then we'll get into some other topics, one by Lawrence Lindsay, Conspiracies of the Ruling Class. And that is going to be a fascinating discussion, which we'll have with him in the second hour. Then Thursday night is the Republican presidential debate, and we'll talk about that on Friday with our weekend edition. So a lot more things to cover the rest of this week, but we certainly want to encourage you to encourage your leaders, and it could be your pastor, it could be your entire church staff, it could be somebody who's a Christian leader that needs to be participating in this. April 9th at Lincoln Memorial, just a great opportunity. And so, Lewis, talk for a minute or so about what is going to happen, what people will find out when they get there, and how they will be able to participate.
Definitely, yeah. So it's as you said, it's from 9 to 4. They're at the Lincoln Memorial, which to us is very significant. Some very historic events from history happened right there at that spot, and we're so grateful the Lord has opened that up for us to gather. Between those two monuments of Lincoln Memorial and Washington, the Washington Monument, both of those monuments representing presidents from history that governed in times of crisis, representing the First and Second Great Awakening. And we're going to be sitting there praying for another great awakening in our nation. So we'll come together that day. The first 2 hours is dedicated to repentance, both personal repentance and corporate repentance. Second 2 hours of that day is we're praying for revival and awakening throughout the nation. There's another big prayer gathering that's taking place on the West Coast with Lou Engle that same day, basically during that same time that we're gathering together. So we're working right now on for at least for a brief period of simulcasting those two meetings together to where we're literally praying together, covering the nation in prayer for revival and awakening. During that 2 hour period, second 2 hour period. And then the third 2 hour period is all about engaging the voice of pastors to speak into culture. Pastors had a tremendous voice speaking into our culture the first 200 years. And the last 50 or 60 years, the voice of the church and pastors has really been dampened. And I feel like the Lord is raising up the voice of pastors again. It has to happen where pastors have speaking into culture, speaking with authority into the affairs of our nation. And it's in these times of crisis when pastors and the church step to the forefront, and we saw a real breakthrough take place, and we're in that same place right now. So the last 2 hours will be the engagement piece. One thing I'm so excited about is that the effects of this, we believe, will go far beyond April the 9th, is we're going to give resources to the pastors and Christian leaders gathered there that day, if they can go back to their local cities and communities and begin to gather at a local level, at what we're doing at a national level, of praying together at a local level in their city, of uniting together, pastors and Christian leaders uniting together to pray, and then to also to engage the culture, to be a voice, and even practical things such as a voter registration kit that we want to put in the hands of pastors to say, would you make sure that your congregation is registered to vote, and that they are voting biblical, encourage them to vote biblical values. So that will be taking place also. So the effects of this will go far beyond, I believe, just that one day of prayer on April the 9th.
I would certainly agree. And of course, last time we had you on, Lewis, was with Gary Fraser, and he talked about churches impacting culture and pastors being involved in speaking to those issues. And of course, we have our Pray, Organize, and Vote banner that is on our website, pointofview.net, encouraging everybody to go there because we encourage everybody to take the pledge, and that is the pledge to pray for this nation, the pledge as well to educate them, encourage others to vote, and then actually to go out and vote. And just before we run out of time, Rick, let me come back to you because one of the callers wanted to mention this, but I'll just do it for him since he had to go. The scriptures, 2 Chronicles 7:14, say that if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Now, obviously, that was directed at the Old Testament and at the nation of Israel, but don't you think that principle applies today to the United States of America?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, I think it applies today to the United States of America and, in fact, to all of the nations of the earth. When the people of God take a posture of humility, when we assume a posture of humility and brokenness before the Father, that things have gotten beyond our ability to manage or control or even maintain, that when we take that posture of humility before Him, that the Lord moves mightily on behalf of nations, and really His heritage that is locked up with inside of nations that have failed to reach their destiny. We believe that really America has a great destiny yet to be realized and fulfilled. And as a church takes a 2 Chronicles 7:14 posture and position, certainly the Lord will come again and visit his people and indeed heal the land. Absolutely.
Lewis, just before we run out of time, let's maybe give people their marching orders. They can obviously go to the website, and that is going to give them information. So again, that is unitedcry.com, or if they don't remember it, we have a link on the website. When they go there, you have a section, for example, about United Cry. You have travel information, charter bus information. You have press resources, all sorts of things. It seems to me right now we need to encourage people to register so that you have a pretty good idea of how many people are going to be out there in front of the Lincoln Memorial. So what are the next steps that people need to take?
Definitely. If they would, definitely register. Of course, there is no cost to this gathering, but we're asking people to register and to have an idea of who the number that is coming. And then also, we have if you would, go to our Facebook page and like our Facebook page. We put daily, several times a day, we put updated information of speakers, what will be taking place that day, new speakers that are coming on board, and national leaders that are coming on board. And so we're so excited. We have 150 national leaders and Graham Lotz. Rick Curry, I'm so thankful he's on the phone today with us. Will be there with us speaking that day. A whole litany of those. You can see many of those names of those who will be with us on our website. But we're posting 3 or 4 times a day on the Facebook page. So like that, and then you'll get continuous updated information. And please plan to come. It's so important in this time in history to be a part of this. If you're a pastor, Christian leader, or just a believer that has a heart for our nation to pray, come and join us.
Again, Facebook page, real easy to find. It's just facebook.com/UnitedCry, or you can find it through unitedcry.org. So lots of great resources. And guys, I'm looking forward to being with you in Washington, D.C., and I appreciate you giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Thank you so much for all the encouragement and support and being with us that day.
Well, again, we'll continue talking about this, but we wanted to give you kind of a 1 month out reminder, because if you've been procrastinating, and I know my listening audience well enough to know, I see what happens sometimes when we do fundraising and everything else. You wait to the last moment. Well, we're now getting into a window where it would be really important if you need to get a plane flight. So let me encourage you to find out a little bit more. Take the time to go to that website and take some action. So that's all we have for today. Here, we are going to spend some time tomorrow looking back at the Democratic presidential debate tonight. Then the next night you have the Republican presidential debate, so that will keep us somewhat busy, but we'll certainly be looking at some of these other issues. And while we talk about the election, let me one more time encourage you to visit today the website, pointofview.net, and click on the banner that says Pray, Organize, and Vote. As you go there, there will be a page that will actually show up before the material that we normally make available to you. And this is a pledge, and we really want to encourage you to make a pledge to pray for this nation, and then to educate and encourage others to get involved in the election, and then finally to vote. This is important, and so we encourage you to take that pledge and get involved. That's all we have for today. It's going to be an interesting program tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it, and I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back on Thursday.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net, or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net.
and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for